Welcome everybody to the Kanban Coaching Exchange. It's great to see you. Last time we met it was quite sunny, but today in England it's pretty windy and it's pretty wet. So just another typical day for us here. So tonight we've got the fabulous Andrew Kidd and Matt Odell joining us from the UK. I have to admit, Matt is somebody who is new to me. But I got to know Andrew through working together at the trainer camp for Kanban, and he is an accredited Kanban trainer. And so when I got to meet him, I thought it was super natural to get him to come and talk and host at the Kanban Coaching Exchange. And then he said, I've got this fabulous partner, Matt, who I do a whole heap of work with. And has the opportunity to come and share all of the cool things that they've been doing together in the British Army. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Matt and Andrew, who's going to take us through their talk. Over to you, boys.
Thanks, Helen. Probably if Matt and I've got about 40 slides that we want to whiz through and try and catch questions. So maybe if we take questions at the end, Matt?
Yeah, that sounds good.
But we can always back up and dig into the slides in a little bit more detail. I guess with most folks, it's always a challenge when you're presenting something that you've been doing for a year and trying to sort of squish it down into a small chunk. But we've honed it down to a few slides. But what we'll try and do is whiz through. But let me click on there. So. Yeah, that was our agenda. So basically, we're just really going to have a look at the project that we undertook. We're going to try and map what we did into static and tease out some lessons learned. So there we are. That's myself and Matt. My background is in transformation. As I said, my paths crossed Helen's. You can see the sort of badges there. We've got swimming, we've got Lego. Matt, who are you?
Hey everybody, Matt Odell. I'm relatively new to all things Agile, Kanban, and I started off in the world of Scrum. I left the British Army after 16 years as an infantry officer in June 2020 to set up my MilieuX, my user research company. And ever since then, I've actually been lucky enough to be working on contracts for Army headquarters. So yeah, that's me. I met Andy 18 months ago and he's pulled me into the world of Kanban. So it's his fault that I got those two badges on the bottom. He's taken me on a bit of a journey in the last 12 months.
Cool. So let's kick off. So our project was what we come to know and love as it's termed a strategic discovery. So what is a discovery? UK, if anybody's not familiar with the UK government way of building services, old school, we would build it, we'd formulate the policy, capture requirements, develop and launch, and upset the users because we were so far off the mark. That's bad. So government decided what we're going to do is we're actually going to break it into phases and draw down budget based on each phase. Initially, a discovery is undertaken, which maps nicely onto the first sort of bullets of static. Try to understand the problem space, understand the sources of dissatisfaction, etc. Develop some prototypes, some options, then the alpha phase, prototype them, build them out, and then when we're ready to say, yeah, we think we're going to go with option C, then we take that into a beta phase and scale it, and we look at the problems of scaling. Then we transition into live, but we've got our eye on live all the way from the get-go, really, so that we're not firebombing live operations with something that they've never heard of. So the idea is we pull that right through. So yeah, we undertook a discovery. The team, Matt, you led the charge.
So I did, yeah. So this is us. I like Chris did. Chris in the top left is our military product manager. He's a 15-year Royal Artillery officer. We were lucky enough also to have a civil servant as a project manager, and then the rest of the team made up of user researchers, human factors engineers, and the technical developer. What's actually one of the things we were really lucky with here and one of the first teams to do it within the program, the Land Environment Tactical Communications Program, is actually be a cross-functional team that spans what would be traditionally the customer one, customer two, and supplier. So rather than sort of have the different handoff points that many of the other projects have got, we were working together every day as one sort of cross-functional team, which was pretty fantastic.
Cool.
And probably normal for everybody else on the call, but for defence, it was a bit novel.
So we were set off and really asked to go and look at a whole set of functional applications. So these are functional areas, and we'll keep referring to them as we go through the presentation. But the idea was that we would go out, find some requirements for a battle space management application, a BMA, and that is what the guys and gals on the on the field would be using and communicating with each other. But as we unfold the story, you'll see that these groupings, these logical kind of functional areas of army start to make a lot more sense in how the army operates on the battlefield. So we were asked to go out, harvest some requirements, and then use those to inform the BMA. That was the challenge. We're going to try and map it onto static, probably hitting the first 4 notes and having a bit of a bash at the final 4. But really what we're trying to achieve is this was something that's never been done at this scale before. So we were pioneering there. And Matt and I had worked together. We'd done the Kanban coaching together, and we thought, great, we're going to be able to use the KMM and all sorts of really cool stuff. And as is often the case, great plans never survive first contact with the enemy. Who's Elliot? He's our secret weapon. Only we can see him. So I just want you to remember that. He doesn't exist, really. He's a figment of your imagination, but he came in really, really useful, and we'll tell you why. So, Matt, divisional warfighting, how's it work?
Nobody knows. No. So this is that was yes. So essentially, yeah. When you talk about the UK's armoured divisional warfighting capability, what essentially it is, it's upwards of 50,000 people, sort of a massive cross-functional sort of team that covers almost all aspects of government. So whilst it follows UK government policy, sort of UK laws, and sort of it has its own then doctrine, policy, constraints overlaid onto it. But think of it as literally everything from the traditional warfighting that folk will see on TV, right the way through to hospitals, mail delivery, military policing. It's a bit of everything, all wrapped up into sort of one little ecosystem that deploys onto a battlefield, as sort of mapped down there. So yeah, that's the warfighting division.
Cool. Now here's where Elliot starts to come in useful. So it had never been approached before, and to see the whole team on the field, which has never been done before, we were asked to go out and measure it. So we're looking at the technology from what we call bearer upwards. So that's the radios, am I right, Matt? Radios, handsets, that sort of good stuff.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So yeah, from the application layer really is what we were tasked to look at.
So what we're seeing here is a graphic representing the battle underway, and we found it, in the absence of anything else coherent, we were looking at 2 types of users wrapped up in a service which is delivering an outcome, an effect. Matt, is it true to say that effects are the currency on the battlefield?
Yes, they are. So just to explain what it is, you would ask if you're issuing a set of orders, you would include effects in it. So we need you to have the following effect. You would then, at your level and the next level down, take that effect and split it, and ultimately issue your subordinates elements of that effect to do it up. So it becomes a very layered thing, and I'll touch on that shortly as well.
Cool. So we've got end users, who are the men and women who are using the equipment to bring the effects into being, and they are supported by enabling users who are provisioning, making the service happen. So wrapping that up as a thing, as an Elliot, enables us to treat it as a service. So hey, we've got warfighting as a service delivering an effect to the red diamond on the right hand side there, who's the customer of that service. That is warfighting as a service.
I think
Fires.
before you move on, Andy, actually, that was something that's a key difference that we've been able to pull out, is that the customer of these effects and the actual warfighting service is the bad guys. If you ask anybody in Army headquarters and anyone in the delivery team who the customers are, it will be, well, it's Army headquarters, isn't it? Because that's the traditional, the Army's paying for it, so they're the customer, and they don't really appreciate that it's about the delivery of something to somebody. Sorry, Andy.
No, cool. So worth remembering, and this is why Elliot is a thing. So to try and get hold of a thing when we're using static and we're looking at a service at a time, what we'll see as we go through the slides is we have a mesh of services that are meshed and meshed again. So it is really complex, but we've tried to simplify it, and that really for the purposes of measuring it and trying to establish a baseline of performance, we had to invent Elliot, much to the chagrin of our product manager. But Elliot enabled us to actually get our arms around the whole thing and try and establish a baseline to then pass upwards the chain of command to be able to say, here's the baseline performance of the service. So here's an example of one. So this is fires. What are fires, Matt?
So this is my Johnny Age 5, sort of trying to simplify some of our findings. But so essentially, fires covers all aspects of the Royal Artillery. So they've got the vehicle firing on the right hand side, folk finding things on the left hand side, and all of the processing going through it. I've used an example of as a neutralised service that's being delivered to the customer there, being pulled across a single team board, because this was really what the customer thought they were asking for us as well. When we started the discovery, they wanted user journeys. They wanted to understand how something happened and how the user at the other end of it finished that journey. Unfortunately, nothing worked like that, and there were multiple teams involved. So you ended up handing off on teams. And if you can flick to the next one, Andy, it gets way more complicated than that, because what you find is that all times there are multiple service requests coming in for a fires effect across the battle space from multiple different teams. Different cells are discarding and aborting various sort of effects as the battle changes, and then ultimately not all of those customers get their effect delivered to them at the end of the day. So there's a huge amount of prioritization going on. What makes this then even more complex is that this is a continuously changing organization. So as they are moving, as they are retask-orging and sort of planning for the next sort of operations, all of those teams and those team structures are changing. So whilst each team knows what their inputs and their outputs are, they're constantly moving around, and it's a very fluid ecosystem.
So number 2, so we've got a sense of what makes the service fit for purpose. It's the ability to be able to deliver an effect. And so what are the sources of dissatisfaction? Who doesn't love a slide with silos on it, right? As we looked at the functional areas, we were looking at fires, battle group, organic anti-armor, etc. We okay, yeah, we understand this, but Army doesn't actually think in that way. Those are teams, but they don't directly map onto how the Army functions. And then what we found is, hence the babushka doll, there were nested problems within that. So the whole thing got really complex really quickly. Part of the challenge as well is remember Elliot, we were looking at something, and to everybody we were talking to, we were talking about different things. So there wasn't a consistency of language or the way that change is being delivered across the field. So we were looking at 25, 26 different applications and services in the warfighting context. Some of those mapped into programs, some didn't. It all became really, really difficult to try and baseline what we were able to then talk about. And just to try and put that into a little bit of context, is we were delivering training. The training was around particular applications, and they were at different levels. So depending on where you were, they would be different again, depending on which category you sat in. And none of this mapped into either inside the organization or outside from the user's experience. And so we ended up with this really consistent message that was, we don't train, etc., as we fight. So on the field, and a good metaphor to use is like a football team, on the field, the team is really, really dynamic. However, back from an organizational point of view, that functionally, that's tried to be pushed through change programs and portfolios in different ways. And it's really, really difficult to try and baseline any sort of performance. We ended up developing a set of dependencies, and as we can see, the outcome is to try and improve the service, which is effective warfighting, which then has the inputs as dependencies. And Elliot, for us, enabled us to be able to link end user performance or their experience of the service with the enabling users experience of the service and suppliers' inputs. So this was the first time we really managed to get our arms right around the whole piece, and we were able to take on the left hand side something that was quite abstract and say, well, actually what we could use are some proxy measures to say, with the end user experience, if we talk to all the end users and look at how they are cohering together as an integrated fighting force, and we're able to link that to the enabling users and their experience of being able to deliver that, we're going to be able to baseline something. And that really was the performance framework that we took forward into the user experience. So now we're going to just dip into how we're able to look at the sources and the nature of the demand. We looked at the end user experience, and then we'll look at the enabling users experience. So Matt, do you want to jump in? We've talked to a lot of your mates.
Yeah, so can do. This was the good bit. This was the most fun for me, and actually the most enlightening, because I learned a lot more about the army than I learned in the 16 years when I was in. We essentially went out and interviewed a good smattering of all of those functional areas from across users across the UK, from up north right to the westest of Wales, from guys that work with electronic warfare through to those firing sort of heavy artillery and flying drones. So it was pretty good. We got large coverage. I think upwards in total of 230 users from across the division. Go on to the next one, Andy. And over the course of the 12 months, we developed a fairly slick research process because we recognised that we needed to be turning around the interviews ready for follow-on days with the insights that we got from it in order to sort of dive back in, as I said, because this wasn't a traditional single user journey, and it was a sort of a multiple mesh of people trying to do lots of things at once. We were constantly iterating, trying to understand what that picture looks like. For those that don't recognize some of those terms, we experimented around actors and personas because of each role on the battlefield had a unique was unique. So personas didn't necessarily work. And if anyone ever wants to follow up on the research side of it, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or elsewhere. But in the interest of time, we'll probably keep moving on.
Cool. And it started to look a little bit like this. So this gave us the qualitative data to understand through talking to the different functional areas and try to map what was going on and how the users are interacting. And as Matt said, the standard types of artifacts that one might use to look at the personas of a service and the journeys or transactions and interactions didn't really hold because of the dynamic nature of what was going on. It was rather like trying to map a football game. So we developed a set of artifacts that really worked quite well with us, and we were able to develop a high volume of qualitative findings. And we were using grounded theory as a research method. And we quickly, I say quickly, it took us about a year, we reached a point of saturation where we were able to predict what the users in interviews were able to then tell us ahead of those interviews. So we knew we'd reached that particular point. And so it says it there, 117 problem statements. And if anybody wants a hardcore lesson in Confluence, Matt does take private sessions. We again developed a phenomenal way of integrating all of these, so you could almost come in from any particular area that was of interest to you. Don't forget our silos. If you're FIRES based and you're a capability sponsor looking at things from a FIRES perspective, you could drill right into the problem space and see what prototype options we were offering based upon that. And that was the prototype offerings were based on some of the innovations that folk were already creating, and things and recommendations that we would have that you might the organisation might take forward. So, anything else on that, Matt?
No, I suppose I probably should caveat that 117 problems makes it look really bad. Some of these ranged from really niche specific things that if you could just fix a system integrating with another system, you would have significant improvements in information flows, right the way up to some big suggestions about how you could alter training in order to achieve better outcomes. But yeah, that is the important thing is we've given them a really good list of upstream options now for improving that warfighting service.
Cool. So what was the sort of boxes along the bottom are the thematic analysis that we did on the problem statements. So we've got different buckets, and this is from the end user's point of view. We've got things that you can see: situational awareness, training, equipment, etc. We've linked those through to a set of benefits, intermediate benefits, which aggregate up into end benefits, and that was the mapping that we did based on some work by another chap who's quite handy with operational research. And this was one of the major programs was using this, had just started considering using this, so we got the opportunity to really to field test it to see would this give us a way of baselining a service performance. We did the same thing on the enabling user side of the service, so the service operators, the service managers, and the thing held up true. So it was quite useful. So then we were able to quantify the data to create service performance dashboards. So we've got the end user experience here. And it was the first time really that we linked the end user experience right through to service KPIs. This has not been done in Army before. Able to do that on the enabling user side of the house as well. So this was really, if you put those two together, that's almost like a dashboard that you've got on Elliot himself. Delivery capability. Remember the elephant? If we did a bit of a dive into the current service performance, has anybody come across these before? If you're anything, if you've got any exposure to MSP or programmatic governance, you're used to the cat's cradle of chaos benefits mapping type exercises. And we found that of all the major programs in Army, they didn't share a single set of objectives or benefits, so we didn't have a consistent currency to be able to share across the piece, which is why Elliot came into being. And this was another major finding as well. We talk about on the maturity model, looking at lead with values. It's all good, and we think, that's cool. And it's sort of whose values specifically should we be leading with? And Matt and I were joking earlier about we actually think we found a level below oblivious, but let's stay with oblivious as the first one. We found that a real strong center of gravity in achievement, and the cadences, all the behaviors tend to fall out the back of that, but that is really the nature of the organization. And so when we're talking about leading with values, whose. Are we talking about armies? Are we talking about civil service? Are we talking about any of the defence suppliers? And then those values are, this was another problem and another major finding, was the different ethical frameworks that go with those value systems. Obedience, the command and control structures, honouring the chain of command. But also you've got ethical framework of care, but also a reason. What's the right thing for us to be able to do? Just because we can doesn't make it right. And so what we found was it wasn't always simple to be able to say that is the right thing, that is the right option, just because we think it is so, we reason it is so. There are other considerations. So that also made the delivery capability quite challenging. Then there is the proliferation of everybody innovating, from rocket pants to hydrogen fuel cells to you name it. So everybody's having a go, and they were snaking all over the organization as well. So trying to work out how the delivery workflow might work was quite challenging. Have I missed any bits so far, Matt?
No, I think the only thing I'd add from the slide 31 actually on values, I should have jumped in earlier, was this was something that first struck me when I was on the KMM course, and it was when I started to really look at the Army values and standards that I'd worked under, regimental values and mottos, down to unit, down to subunit. And actually what I've found, and what Andy and I've spoken about before, is that the army isn't an army. It is made up of many armies of different groups from the past that have formed one organization, that have brought all of that history and sort of their past and their values and various things with them. So it is incredibly difficult to try and map and understand.
Yeah. So and we see all sorts of behaviours taking place in the organisations which may get in the way of being able to deliver the products and services that people are looking for. Yes, we see different routes through the organisation for innovation and change. And then anybody who's spent any time in defence would the MOD side of things would recognise this horror story. CADMID.
So yeah, CADMID, the concept, assessment, demonstration, manufacture, in-service and disposal. The most traditional of traditional approaches to delivering programs. So starting on the left-hand side with a really good idea, right the way through to the disposal. Each of the tube underground coloured lines represents whether it's requirements, acceptance, or sort of one of the other tasks, and then each of those green boxes is essentially an artifact or an activity that needs to happen. It's horrid. I don't think I've ever come across a project that has followed it end to end correctly. It is very, very process heavy and laborious. So much so that one of the observations was that there was way too much focus on the delivery and not on delivering, because you could well take up all your time just trying to get from one end of the tube to the other.
Cool. So then we moved into identifying and defining class of service. So
Andy mentioned earlier the effects. Unfortunately, I can't share them with you because of the UK ones are at least classed as official sensitive, but you can look these up and get a few examples off the interweb. But so yeah, essentially that's it. The language on the battlefield is effects, whether that is sort of those things there: defeat, neutralize, find, secure. Everybody knows what that language is, and as sort of I mentioned at the beginning, it's the sort of the call for those service from either a higher commander or a peer on the battlefield that triggers folk to do things.
Well, they became our types of work, and each within those we've got various classes of service within those. Expedite, obviously, in many ways, we are able to map Kanban in lots of different ways onto what we're doing. But probably for another time. So we'll come back. We had 117 problem statements to have a look at, and so at the conclusion of the discovery, able to say that we were making 48 different recommendations of how to move things forward and improve the service. Matt, you ran quite a tight ship. This looks like one of yours.
Fortunately, had another coach on the team to try and make sure that I was doing it right. No, so this was good. So we originally started for the first few months following the Scrum framework, but sort of moved to more of a continuous flow in September. And over time, we really started to hone what our Kanban system looked like. So on the left-hand side, that's the research examples of the various different the board policies we were using and introducing the various different Kanban meetings to an organization with a product manager and a project manager that weren't familiar with them and didn't understand sort of what their roles necessarily were. And then on the right hand side, more developing some of their team agreements. This is just one example. We've got numerous pages of this, and I'm quite proud actually that we were quite slick at the end, and we got some metrics Andy's going to move on to. This is the hockey stick. The thing to focus on in the middle is the star. The star was when the customer accepted our outputs and said, "Yep, I like the way it's presented. I like what you're doing. Want more of that." So we were able to sort of rapidly sort of move from there. But more importantly, we were using some of our metrics to change the way we went and did research. So from doing it online in group sessions through to getting out and actually doing things in person. As you can see, the green boxes get progressively closer together towards the end, and we were able to speed up and conduct a lot more research. If you move on to the next one, Andy, this is a horrible lead time scatter plot for anybody who sees that the line going up in the middle is not very good. But this was caused by a product managers having to arrange some user research that got cancelled, and then jumping on the back of some more research. And what happened was we ended up taking on 3 times as much as we really would have liked, and it was pushing work into onto the team in late October, early November, and essentially it caused paralysis and the team stopped. We did a reset over Christmas and said, look, let's stop, let's readjust our processes. We understand actually now what the definition of done is. We know what the customer wants, and then let's just focus on that. Let's not do any more than they've asked for. And then from sort of after Christmas, we were able to sort of accelerate. The green was our user research, and the orange dots are when we started to do some of the technical debt work from the previous 9 months. We're finishing this week, and as you can see, there's a really big spike of a lot of stuff happening on the right hand side. And effectively what we've done is we've moved the bottleneck from the researchers doing the research and analysis into the review column. One of our policies was that the project manager and product manager would conduct the final review of everything, just to sort of cast an eye over it, an activity that would probably take anywhere between 30 seconds and an hour, depending on how much work and reading he had to do. But at one point, I think the ready for review column had upwards of 70 cards in it, where it was supposed to only have a couple. So he was struggling to get through the review stuff. It didn't help that he was planning to move his family to Romania, so he was sort of quite focused on that. So he wasn't necessarily present all the time. And then the irony was the free week where we could have cleared quite a lot of the stuff was the week that his booking in the early part of the project came through. For him to go away and do his Kanban courses. So he came back really pleased, having done sort of the 0 to hero for Kanban management professional. However, then recognized where he should have been clearing stuff off of the board at the same time. So that was good. But if you move to the next one, Andy, if we take away the review activity, that's what it sort of looks like. So actually, from a sort of the MilUX daring futures and the rest of the team delivering to Chris as our customer, we're a bit more confident that we were fairly stable after we did that hard reset at Christmas, which was very good. And I think that.
So if anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about what we've done, there's our work was published on Defence Digital blog. That's the URL there. Please feel free to go and have a look at it. And Matt and I will be breaking this down into smaller, more digestible pieces and transmitting it through the power that is LinkedIn. But that sort of brings us to the end. Any questions, Helen?
But first of all, let's say
You're on
thank
mute
you
or far, far away.
Andrew. So let's just give
Can anybody hear Helen?
camera.
Ellen, I think you're far, far away. That's
There we go.
Crystal,
There we go. It's because I was eating my dinner in between. So let's just say a big thank you to Matt and Andrew there. Apologies about that. Woo, woo, woo. So let's get your hand up if you've got a question. But if not, I'm going to kick you off with a question. And maybe I missed it. But just remind me, what was the outcome that you were trying to achieve? What was the thing at the beginning which kind of like said, oh, we want to use a kind of like Kanban agile kind of like methods? And then, how far did you get at the end towards actually achieving that?
So this was, I'll have a stab at it. A discovery is the first few points of the static model. Ordinarily, an organization wouldn't undertake a review of this magnitude, but the powers that be decided, right, go do, and we got an unprecedented opportunity to actually look at the whole thing. So the discovery really was to try and understand the end user experience, what it was like for them, and identify what problems they were experiencing. So could we make it better? And did we have ideas for how to take that forward? So ordinarily, if you're building a product or a service, automating an existing service, you'd have a fairly tightly bound scope and be able to take that from A to B quite quickly. We were just sort of given the whole thing to have a look at, and the way the commercials were stood up to ask us to look at it was, we quickly threw out, because it was impractical to do it in that way. What we found was, if I use a footballing metaphor, we were asked to try and improve the England football team. There's an undertaking. And what you're going to do is you're going to spend a month studying the defence, and a month studying the goalie, and then a month studying the one of the midfielders. That's not how they work. They actually work as an integrated fighting force, and so very quickly it became impossible to try and isolate any of the challenges per se. And when we found some themes, so the discovery as a total was looking at Elliot, looking at the integrated fighting force, understanding some of the challenges and baselining the performance, and in that became what we finished doing. Is we were able to talk back to the Army portfolio and say, we recommend that you look at the way that you're managing the programs and link the end user experience through to the procurement. Here's a framework. We're not mandating it. We're recommending that you do, because one of the programs put it forward and they thought it was a good idea. But how could you do that? But also, could you then look internally to the service and start using some of the measurements there, and that way doing benefits realization a lot earlier than previously had been possible. So it was really, could we baseline the current offering, the current service, and we were able to get our arms right around it and be able to do that.
And thinking about, I think it was like 147 or 117, like a
Mm,
lot of things that could be kind of like improved.
mm.
How many of those were kind of like executed in your time, and what difference did that kind of really make to the bottom line? So I saw a lead time chart where things kind of like started to
Mm.
reduce down and how long it took. But was there other stuff that you looked at as well, kind of like fitness for purpose, the kind of like satisfaction of the service? What are your thoughts?
So I can take one, but I can't give you the detail. So the chance that you saw at the end was our team's performance and our team's working, but I only knows which one I'm going to, which is the fires service. No, so if you go back and to the fires service one, what we were able to do is by conducting the research in the way that we did and looking at all of the different sort of islands in that chain, is we were able to give a totality of how long that takes. However, when we were interviewing each individual group, we were getting very different numbers. So if you said, "Oh, how long does it take to go from the red triangle on the left to the red triangle on the right?" Most people were coming back with a number. Through the research, we were able to say it's not quite as good as you think, and here it is. But what we've been able to do is link the problems that we found with the alpha options, those potential solutions, in order to then say, if you fix this, it will have a measurable impact and reduce it in such a way. Because of the way that this whole end-to-end service requires everybody to be practicing it. I'm not sure what actually brought out is that the organization hasn't actually done this. So a lot of the time when we're talking to people about what are you actually doing now, they don't really know what they would do if they deployed onto the battlefield. So they know what they do when they go on exercise, but they don't see it in its entirety. We've mapped it sort of in its entirety and found, I suppose, the efficiency paradox is at play, where lots of local optimization have potentially made things worse, but we've offered them a route out. So that's where we've got to. The next stages is the army's going to pick this up, and they're going to go after fixing it. So in our time, unfortunately, because of the way it was go and take what should have been a sort of a agile way of working from discovery to live in 6 months, we as a team have only just done the discovery. So we're keen to see what and how quickly they move to now start implementing.
Okay, cool, thank you. And there's some questions in the chat channel. So Alexander is asking, are things simplified as they're being kind of like improved? I guess you can talk about it in the fire service one, but if the other ones are still being executed. But, I just remember that really long flow diagram. It's just like, whoof, you totally needed a magnifying glass to zoom in there. Does it need to be that complicated, I guess, what Alexander is saying? Is there scope for kind of like simplification, or is like what they do so complex and integrated and rigorous that it actually has to be like that? Your thoughts?
So my thoughts are that actually in lots of senses, that really long chain is designed for building tanks, which have a really long lead time. So getting a new tank might take 10 years. It is absolutely not suitable for digital. And what you've got to try and track is sort of almost three spinning circles of: one is you're going to get a new tank in 10 years. Two, you're looking at the bearers on the new tank, the radios that go on the new tank, and then you're looking at the applications that go on the devices on the new tank. And there's a lot of change going on, which means that there's a lot of dependencies. Unfortunately, following the traditional approach means that there's often delays, and those delays then have knock-on delays and are then further compounded. So it's probably a victim of making itself worse. But that said, there are digital projects within Army and Defence which are now moving far quicker and delivering value far quicker, which are getting the people in this space to take a bit of notice and start trying to work out how they would do it, how they could streamline that delivery.
Okay. And then Aaron's backing that question up by saying, did you use any value stream analysis? I don't know what FMEA stands for. Maybe somebody else does. But did you use any value stream analysis to do this? How did you do it?
Crumbs.
Or just a load of Post-it notes and a shit ton of Sharpies?
there was that. So if anybody saw a spike in Post-it shares, 3M shares over the last year, that would be it. I think just building on the analysis, we've tried to start with looking for the commonality. So what is the currency here in the change side of the organization? And everybody's doing it differently. So we saw a lot of these things where it's, well, how are you measuring the benefits? You mentioned earlier, bottom line. How are we able to demonstrate good value for money? And this sort of spoke to, I think I had a little bit earlier, was the commercial efficiency. So IB6 is the dial on the left-hand side. With the change vehicles, as Matt said, buying a tank, big, long, tortuous process, but it's the same if you're writing an application. And what we're trying to do is delaminate in the procurement space so that people treat the acquisition of technology differently to assets and vehicles, etc. And even then try to delaminate the software from the hardware. So we start to move into this notion of flight levels and different cadences or different processing speeds. But delivery efficiency is a really good one, because then we can look at, okay, so what is the percentage in terms of value that we are changing the investment into something that makes a difference, makes the service more effective. On the end user side of things, we're looking at survivability and other aspects of making this service safer to use, and those sorts of questions. So, either side of it, is this making a difference? And when we've got this sort of cat's cradle of benefits, which is a very viable, very valid method of doing it, but doesn't work in software, because what we want is that immediacy of feedback. We want to be able to make a change, put it in front of somebody. Did it make your life easier or better? And one of the recommendations that we have is to be able to lean into the training function more for this earlier development and getting those feedback loops in place. So probably not your classic levels of analysis. Be really just getting our arms around the thing was the first action.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a tough question here, but other people are going to be thinking it. So it seems to me as if there was a lot of analysis done, which has ultimately led to the kind of the building of a backlog of stuff that they then want to go after and improve, which kind of seems contradictory of get something, because you're talking about tanks, you're talking about fire services, these are kind of if the army is the saga, the tanks is the epic, what made you kind of go scattergun on every single process, rather than kind of saying, well, what's the one that's causing you the most pain right now, and let's do that? And what conversation did you have to try and convince them otherwise, or was this the right thing?
Matt.
Sorry, calling a spade. Analysis done here.
No. The watching that realization happen to our product manager, as he realized we had fallen into the trap of not actually being agile. It turns out that these date back for about 20 years in terms of the functional areas that they thought would be around a system that was brought in about 20 years ago, and they haven't really gone away. The pivot happened really quickly with the product manager, actually, to be honest, when we started trying to sort of analyze it in the way that they originally wanted, which was user journeys. And we were going, well, hold on, something happens here to the left and something happens to the right. Where does that go? So we were a bit scattergun in our approach because they were directing these silos. We were then a little bit scattergun, I suppose, following the evidence when we found where we wanted to go next, because we wanted to follow the information trail. But actually the biggest, longest pole in the tent in doing research within the military is access and availability of the users. It's if someone says, well, we really want to know about ground-based air defence, and there's one regiment that does it in one way, and they're busy, they're on ops, they're on exercise, then it's really hard to get access to them. So we kind of went wherever we could, and that's why on that chart which had the star in the middle, there was so much of a flat line on the left hand side, which was sort of before we started to really have enough base of information to start to see the patterns of where the problems were and what some of those solutions were. So it took us a while just to get enough information, because it was a bit, to be honest, at the beginning. We were taking users wherever we could find them, and at times that was, oh, hey Chris, I've just seen something on LinkedIn, it looks really interesting, can you get us on Salisbury Plain to go and do some interviews?
Okay, cool. And you got another
just to add to that a little bit, it's Andy's top tip: follow the money. So it's all in the commercials, and this was another major finding of ours, or recommendation, was to change the way things are being procured, because you're kind of locked into that. And so the commercials were, go do this in the way that we want it done. We kind of kicked down the walls of that and did what we needed to do, which was in service of the enabler users and the end users. But the commercials were stood up in a particular way, and that, I think, in all my years of transformation exposure and experience now, having those conversations with the procurement folk to get any changes or change procured in the right way is absolutely critical. I think, and I'll probably take this one to wherever, but forget the actual delivery space. You've got to get the procurement right, because if you don't get the procurement right, then the delivery is constrained by the procurement.
Final question I've got from the chat. Can you please elaborate a little the way you set up the persona and actors with a quick example? That one's from Genchi.
Yeah, can do. So I think, very early on, we tried to write personas around ranks, and then it was around specific appointments. What we realized is if you start to write a persona around a specific appointment, you might be writing a persona about Dave, and Dave's the only guy that does it on the battlefield. So you may as well just go, well, here's Dave's needs, go and talk to him. So what we ended up with is 4 personas, which were director, a planner, a doer, and an information admin. And we mapped some sort of core needs to them and some sort of built them out. But then for every person we interviewed, we developed sort of actors. So whether it was an infantry company commander operating in a warrior, and what his specific needs were, right the way through to sort of signalers, commanding officers. So each actor had individual needs, but we put the personas and the actors together, so we could say that captain fulfilling that role with those sort of needs that are related to that role are for a planner and a director, for example.
Brilliant, thank you. I don't know if anyone else had. I could hear the dog going mental on a squeaky toy in the background there. That did make me laugh.
He's got a new toy.
So your dog's not? That's not mine. Mine's
it's not yours.
Under my desk.
It's Bovril.
There he goes. He's going for it again. Well, we're nearly out of time. And so, Thank you for all of the questions in the chat channel. And obviously, thank you to Matt and Andrew. Thank you very much for giving up your time and answering my grilling there. You know, I'm a tough griller when it comes to these questions, but you did really well. And we appreciate you taking the time to come and share your journey with us. So let's give Andrew and Matt a big warm thank you, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.